Paloma. So much for technology. If I had a piece of paper in my hand, I would have been able to just walk straight up here and read from it. I am quite happy to be a part of this occasion on behalf of the Management Committee of the Guyana Prize for Literature. The original hope was that Chris would have been able to do a workshop for the Guyana Prize, but we had to postpone that for a later occasion. But we are still very happy to be associated with the presentation and the literary work that she is doing. I just want to take advantage of this to say something within the Guyana Prize program, and it is that we have another workshop, the third workshop in the 2012-2013 series, will be held on the 18th and 20th of February, that is next Monday and Wednesday, at the National Library, the annex of the National Library. And it is a master class to be conducted by leading prize-winning Guyanese novelist Janice Lowe Shineburn. So that is the 18th and 20th. And all writers wanting to take part in this workshop are asked to send in a sample of their work, not a small sample of their work. There's an email address to which it should go, which is in the newspapers, published in the newspapers, deborahL65@yahoo.com. But you can check today's newspapers and you will find it. Check the weekend newspapers and you will find it. Sorry, Paloma, for having stitched that in. And I will now move to what you had asked me to do. Now, we are in the presence this afternoon of a neat kind of confluence. Guyana at this time is in the middle of celebrating nationhood. Of it is the Republic Day 1 week from now. The publication being launched in Guyana today is a celebration of nationhood, as it is captured through photography and explanatory text and the literature of Trinidad and Tobago. The easiest way to begin an analysis of this book, Littscapes by Chris Rampersad, is to describe it. Give an idea, so that the audience gets a clear picture of exactly what it is. But that is not the easiest way, because it is a text that defies easy description. There are more types that it is than things that it is not. The publication is Littscapes, Landscapes of Fiction from Trinidad and Tobago by Chris Rampersad, published in St. Augustine, Trinidad in 2012. The bibliographical details describe it as a first edition 2012, which is not surprising given its multitasking nature and its wide reach. And this suggests that also considering the several things that the book seems to set out to cover, there is more to come in future editions. It is 200 pages of written and visual text, presenting the landscape of Trinidad and Tobago in passages of descriptions, explanations, and quotations, very impressively supported and complemented by hundreds of color photographs and excerpts from the literature of the country. Rampersad always interweaves into her own descriptions the pieces taken from the literature, so that one gets pictures of the several varied subjects from the point of view of the writers and of their fictional characters. These are taken predominantly from works of fiction, covering a range of short stories and novels, but to a lesser extent, there is reference to poetry and drama. The idea of Littscapes comes from this drawing from the literature to give scenes, views, and visions of landscape and life in clear, colorful, illustrative pictures, as well as snippets of how they are treated in the literature. It is a quite thorough artistic concept. It is a portrait and biography of the nation of Trinidad and Tobago. The book is attractively, neatly, and effectively designed, using a recurring motif of the double T. Of course, the double T stands for Trinidad and Tobago, but it is also literature. It also stands for literature, so that there is not only the visual impact, but the tribute to nationhood as reflected in the various works of literature. Littscapes is a work of art, but also it is a documentary, a travelogue, a critical work with visual and literary power. It takes us on a tour of the country, giving some exposure to almost every aspect of life. It may be too heavy and too academic to be called a tourist guide, but no tourist guide can give a better, more comprehensive introduction to Trinidad. It entices and attracts, just as the glossy tourist literature. It looks like a very weighty volume, if you have seen it. It looks like a very weighty volume. But an important factor is that it is very easy to read. Neither is this link to tourism accidental, because one of the objectives of the book is that it must show the value that literature has in promoting and presenting the nation. It must show different uses of literature, encouraging new approaches to it, and make it more attractive and interesting to readers. The book does for literature what literature does for the country. Rampersad tours the countryside and highlights features of it, at the same time exploring the literature to indicate how the writers treat the subjects, what they or their fictional characters say, and how they are used in the plots. Photographs of several sections of Port of Spain are accompanied by the descriptions and literary excerpts. This treatment is given to the capital city, to other towns, streets, urban communities, villages, historic buildings and places, vegetation, animals, institutions, culture, and landscape. The connectedness of nationhood becomes relevant. I started out with a connection on the theme of nationhood between Trinidad and Guyana. And this theme becomes relevant again here, since both Weber and Raleigh have ties to Guyana as strong, if not stronger, than those that they have with Trinidad. Just as the historic development of the country is reflected in the places and monuments, so it is. I'm very sorry. Just as the historical development of the country is reflected in the places and monuments, so it is in the rise of social realism through the fiction of the 1930s in Port of Spain. Rampersad presents her subjects through the eyes of C.L.R. James and writers from the Beacon Group, such as Alfred Mendez, who wrote at that time in Trinidad, and has done the painstaking work and analogous to that of a lexicographer, of sorting out their several hundred references to her subjects. This account includes some memorable passages of serious literary criticism, although these are sometimes brief. They include the entries on The Hummingbird Tree by Ian MacDonald, another writer that is more Guyanese than Trinidadian, with instructive insights into the novel's title and its meaning. Other examples are the references to Lion House in Chaguanas and the Capildeo family, which hold great interest for the background to V.S. Naipaul. Naipaul immortalizes his mother's family, the Capildeos, in Hanuman House and in the Tulsis in his fiction. And Rampersad provides additional information about Naipaul's use of his migratory existence in her discussions of various parts of Port of Spain. There is also another enlightenment in the way such locations as San Fernando, Mayaro, Princesstown accumulate greater meaning when used to treat the work of another novelist, Michael Anthony. Yet another passage of deep criticism is the reference in the book to girl victims as they are treated in the fiction. The other side of this has to do with omissions and reductions. There are many topics that appear on the subscribe. There was not much information, or there were hardly any literary references, even in places where it is known that the subjects were well treated in the literature. Examples of these are the entries on politicians, Calypsonians, and superstitions, all of which abound in the fiction, but not in Littscapes. However, while that is noticeable, it could never be a requirement that the book must cover it, as indeed it cannot. Were it a dictionary, one would fault the lexicographer on important omissions. But this work does so much already that it might be unfair to judge it on its omissions or reduced treatments. Then there are the odd segments in which the publication does behave like a tourist guide without the usual strength of literary material. Added to this are one or two errors copied which are typographical, where there are some small details of literary texts are concerned, such as characters, names, and titles. One or two authors are claimed as Trinidadian, who might well be claimed by other islands. Walcott has produced quite a volume of Trinidadian literature, but some references to his work in this book really belong to St. Lucia and not to Trinidad. Then there is the Tobago question. Trinidad is in all respects the major and dominant island, and this is overwhelmingly reflected in Rampersad's treatment. She says in her text that Trinidadian writers, on the whole, neglect Tobago and treat it as the lesser of two sisters, or do not treat it at all. In this book, therefore, the imbalance is noted. In bringing it alive in the description of landscape, life, culture, and people. It encourages people to take ownership of it. That is literature. You may say the same thing for Trinidad as well. Literature encourages people to take ownership of it, see themselves, their home, or familiar places in it, and accept it as a definer of identity. But the book is as much photography by Rampersad and a number of others as it is literature. And the pictures help to illustrate, highlight, and make the fiction real. Above all, Littscapes, Landscapes of Fiction from Trinidad and Tobago has an extremely powerful sense of place and reinforces what, in Rampersaad's words, is the pull of place on authors. It may claim to be an accessory to what she calls the body of fiction inspired by Trinidad and Tobago. And that phrase, fiction inspired by Trinidad and Tobago, is important because when you go through the literature and when you see the way she reflects it, you will find that seems to be the case. It communicates the character of the country. No one book can do everything. No one book can set out to achieve everything that a literature and a visual text can do for its people and its nation. But whatever you say one book cannot do, this one almost does it.